In this chapter, we're going to look at ZSpheres. ZSpheres are an older tool within Zbrush. They've been around for many, many years, but they're not really well known. Many people aren't aware that you can use them as a means to generate meshes inside of Zbrush. I consider them kind of an armature where you draw out a chain of spheres and then convert that to a polygon mesh like you see here. I use them all the time when I have to make something that's a non-standard form, maybe a character with wings, or a sea serpent, or a dragon. Something where I won't necessarily have a base model that I can start from. Now there's other methods of doing this. You could start purely with Dynamesh and kit bash something with balls of clay and insert meshes. I think ZSpheres work nicely where you're creating that armature and then generate a mesh from that. So you get a nice gesture and you get a nice quick way of creating a base model by drawing out essentially what is a skeleton. So let's go ahead and get started. So to begin with ZSpheres, go to your tool palette, click on the tool palette icon, and then open ZSphere. You'll find it under 3D meshes. The ZSphere looks like a red ball with two different halves. One is slightly darker red than the other. Click and drag to draw it on the canvas, and then go into edit mode. And then I'm just going to snap to a front view and turn on X symmetry so I see two green dots. Now this first ZSphere is called the root sphere. This is the only sphere that you can't delete. And this is the sphere that will be the parent for all the other spheres we're going to draw in our chain. So to begin, turn your draw size down, all the way down. Now ZSpheres are one of the few things in ZBrush where I think it's better to use a mouse than a tablet pen. Simply because it's very easy with a tablet pen to tap extra times and create spheres that you don't want to create. So I think it's best, if you can, use a mouse, but you don't have to. Just be very careful that you don't draw extra spheres by accident. So, bring the two dots together, and then click and drag to draw a child sphere. Now, if I keep dragging, it'll make it bigger. Drag in the opposite direction, it makes it smaller. I want this child sphere to be the exact same size as the parent, so I'm going to press and hold the Shift key, let go of my cursor, and then let go of Shift. Now you'll see that sphere has a little white dot in it. That just means that sphere is selected. So after I've drawn a sphere, I will double click off the model, and that just deselects my Z-sphere. And that's just good practice as you're drawing Z-spheres. After each one, double click off the model to clear your selection. Now we can see you've got your root sphere, and then we have a child sphere coming out from the bottom. Now the root sphere has to have a sphere on either side to be a solid mesh, so let's rotate to the other side and do the same thing here. Bring the two greens dot together, click and drag, press and hold the Shift key, let go of the cursor, let go of Shift, and double click off the model. And that creates something that looks like this. We have the root sphere in the center and a child sphere on either side. Now, this is the bare basics, the most simple 3D mesh that we can create using ZSpheres. Let's see what this will generate. Under the Tool menu, come down here to Adaptive Skin. Under Adaptive Skin, you see there's a button called Preview. If I press the Preview button, it will show me the mesh that will be created. And if I go into Frame mode with Shift F, I can see the actual polygons themselves. Now right now this is set to create a Dynamesh mesh because Dynamesh resolution is turned up. If I turn Dynamesh down to 0 and then press Preview again, that will show me the actual polygon model that will be created. Not a Dynamesh, but just the most low resolution, simple poly mesh with organized edge loops and all quads. My preference is to turn my Dynamesh resolution down and just generate a polygon mesh using ZSpheres because I can always Dynamesh it later. Now the hotkey for preview, as you can see, when we mouse over it, is the letter A. So if I press the A key, it'll bring me back into ZSphere mode. So I'll press Shift F to turn off frame mode, and I'll press W for move. I'm going to grab the top child sphere and drag it up, grab the bottom child sphere and drag it down. So this is the central torso of our character as it stands so far. I will go to E for scale, click and drag, and I can scale that root Z-sphere up, and then go to W for move, and then we'll just position it so we get a little bit of an S-curve to the body. Go back to Q for draw, double click off the model, and now we're going to add shoulders and hips. So for shoulders, I'm just going to click and drag on either side of that top Z-sphere, double click off the model, and I'm going to click and drag at the waist to create hips. Double click off the model and then press the A key to preview the mesh that will generate. If I go to Shift F mode, you'll see each new Z-sphere creates a new polygroup. Now, these polygroups are very similar in color, but those shoulders are a separate polygroup from the torso. And here you can see very clearly that the hips are a separate polygroup from the body itself. See, as I Control-Shift-Click on these polygroups, I can isolate them. So press the A key to drop back into Z-sphere mode. Go to Q for draw, and let's draw some arms on here. I'm going to click and drag, press the Shift key, and then double click off the model. That makes the new child sphere the same size as the parent. Go to W for move and just drag those arms off, and maybe drag those shoulders out just a tick. I'll go to Q for draw, click and drag, press the Shift key to snap it to the same size. Let's zoom out a bit, W for move, and then drag those legs down. Maybe widen the hips a bit. Go to E for scale, and let's just scale down that torso. Now, as I'm shifting and moving these things around, you want to be careful that your draw size isn't set higher than 0. If I turn my draw size all the way down to 1, that's perfect. But if it's higher than that, you might accidentally grab multiple Z-spheres while you're trying to move things around. So I'm going to press the A key and just preview the mesh that's being generated. Now, Z-sphere models I consider to be very similar to an armature when you're sculpting. An armature just being kind of a wire base that you put clay on top of when you're sculpting. Z-sphere mesh is very, very similar to me. I treat it as a very simple base mesh that I'm going to quickly start sculpting on and changing the volumes. It gives me just a basic framework to support my sculpting. So let's press the A key again. Always preview as you're drawing. Don't draw a bunch of Z-spheres and then preview. I try and preview after each one just to make sure there's no problems. So I'm going to go to Q for draw. Now, I can actually insert Z-spheres along the chain just by clicking here between the shoulder and wrist. I'm going to click there, and that adds a new Z-sphere. Go to W for move, and I can pull that down just slightly. Pull the wrist out. E for scale, and I'll scale the wrist down. R for rotate. If I click in between these two Z-spheres, I can rotate these spheres. Go to E for scale. Let's scale that elbow down just slightly. And then press the A key to preview our mesh. Go to W for move, and let's just pull that forward. Pull the elbow down. And just get a nice proportion here. And I'll go to W for move and just adjust that torso position and press the A key to preview. Press the A key again to leave preview mode, and we'll do the same thing here for the legs. I'm going to go to Q for draw, and I'm going to insert two spheres for the knees. E for scale, and I'm going to scale the ankles down. I'm going to go to R for rotate, and let's just rotate those legs slightly. W for move, we'll just change the position of the knee and the ankle. R for rotate, and let's just open those legs slightly. Press the A key, and that previews our mesh. And again, don't worry about the fact that you don't have the volume in the hips or the volume in the rib cage yet, because that will come. We're going to dynamesh this later and start sculpting on it, so it doesn't matter if it's not the exact correct volume. You could go in here and keep adding Z-spheres to adjust the volume, but I feel that's a waste of time, because in the time it takes you to add a Z-sphere and change the volume, you could do that faster once you're in sculpting mode and you're actually sculpting on the mesh. So let's go ahead and add feet. We'll zoom into the ankles, go to Q for draw, start dragging to draw a child sphere, and press the Shift key to snap it, and then double click off the model. Rotate it around to the back, and we'll add the heels the same way, snapping, and then double click off the model, and then use W for move to stretch those out to give the length of the foot. Press the A key to preview the mesh. Again, this is just your mesh preview. We'll press the A key once again to leave that preview. Let's go ahead now and add some hands. Let's zoom into the wrist. I'm going to draw a child sphere, snap it to the same size, and then move to pull it away slightly. E for scale to scale it up. Now that's going to be the body of the hand, the palm. I'm going to do Q for draw, and I'm going to draw a thumb, just a large Z-sphere here, double click. Draw a child Z-sphere, snapping it to the same size, and then go to W for move and pull that sphere out. Press the A key to preview. So that's going to be our thumb. Press the A key again to drop out of preview mode. Zoom into the hand here and go to Q for draw. And we're going to add 4 child spheres here. So let's do 1. Oops, undo that. We added an extra sphere there by accident. So let's just click and drag to draw 1 sphere, double click off the model. Click and drag, double click off the model, click and drag, double click off the model, click and drag, double click off the model. Now, again, I added an extra Z sphere by accident, so I'll just undo that. Press the A key, and you can see there's the roots of our 4 fingers and our thumb. Now I'm going to draw the fingers themselves, and I will do that by clicking and dragging on the parent sphere and just holding down the Shift key, and then double click off the model. And that just snaps that extra sphere to be the same size as the parent. Now I'll go to W for move, and let's pull these finger spheres out. Now I'm going to go to W for move again, and I'm going to move that pinky finger down just slightly. So the fingers kind of follow a bit of an arc here. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect in its shape. We can fix this in sculpting. I just want to get the most basic kind of volumes in here, so we've got something to start working with once we go into sculpting mode. Let's pull that middle finger out slightly, and then press the A key to preview our hand. Now I want to scale down the thumb. Press the A key to go back into Z-sphere mode. Go to E for scale, and I'm going to click in between these 2 spheres. Press the E key and then hold down Alt and click and drag, and it will scale that thumb down just slightly. W for move to move the thumb tip. Now we're going to add knuckles. Press Q, so we're in draw mode again, and I'm going to add a knuckle in the thumb there, and W for move, so I can add a little bit of curvature to that thumb. R for rotate, let's just rotate that thumb down just a tick. W for move, and I kind of want these fingers to be longer, so I'm going to extend them out. When I'm doing creatures and characters, I always find that, unless you're trying to do something that's highly realistic, if your hands are too small, it always looks like a mistake. But if the hands are cheated a little bit bigger, it always looks like a stylistic decision. So with Q for draw, I'm going to click in between each of these, and I just added a knuckle there. Now I'll double click off the model, and let's just rotate around the hand here, and let's just pull that knuckle up, and that'll give us a nice little bit of curvature to those fingers. Press A for preview, and here you can see the preview of our hand. R for rotate, let's bring this finger out. W for move, I just want to straighten these out just a bit. There we are. Now, if I press R for rotate and then click and drag on that wrist sphere, I can rotate the position of the hand, effectively pronating or supinating it. Pronating being when you take your forearm out and then turn your palm to face the ground, and supinating is when you turn your forearm so your palm faces up. I always imagine it's like holding a bowl of soup, so that helps me remember what supinating is. Go to R for rotate. If I click in between the wrist and the hand, I can rotate the hand that way. So I get a nice pose here. Bring those elbows down with move. Go to R for rotate, and I can change the sort of posture of the character here just by adjusting with rotate how the body relates to itself. So let's go ahead and put a head on there. So let's zoom into the torso, Q for draw, and draw a base for the neck. Press the A key, and you can see there's the beginnings of our neck. Double click off the model, and we'll draw a new sphere. Hold down Shift to snap it to the same size. W for move, and we'll extend that neck up. And let's just bring this sphere forward. Always remember that the neck comes out of the torso at an angle from the front. It doesn't do this. A lot of beginners do this. They grow the neck straight up out of the rib cage. That's not accurate. It's very, very important to remember your first rib is at a bit of an angle here, and the neck curves up out of that angle. So press the A key for preview, and here we've got the beginnings of our neck. Now we'll draw the head itself. I'm just going to come up here draw a new sphere for our head, and now I'm going to press the A key, and you'll notice the head disappears. The reason for that is the head is intersecting with the previous spheres. If I take W for move and then bring it up so I can see the transitional rings here, now we'll actually have the head. Now, I again treat ZSpheres as an armature. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about the volume of the head or edge looping because I am going to Dynamesh it. However, if you wanted to add more detail here, for example, get some edge looping, I would just draw two spheres for eyes, double click off the model, draw a sphere for the mouth, double click off the model, maybe some spheres for ears, double click off the model, and then press the A key. Now, it might look quite strange to you, but this does give you an extrusion pattern where you've got edge looping that you could then push in for the eyes, pull out for the ears, and push in for the mouth. And this would be useful if you plan to stay in this topology, but again, I don't feel that that's a valid workflow anymore. That used to be how I taught ZSpheres. However, now we're going to Dynamesh. Invariably, we're going to end up Dynameshing. So I think it's best to create the most basic volumes very quickly, Dynamesh, and then start sculpting your eye sockets and your mouth and ears. I don't feel that it's really necessary to do this, but I did want to show it's possible in case going forward you find you're in a situation where you need to stay in this low resolution topology and have some kind of edge looping to work with to begin with. But once again, you can always Z-remesh this as well. We have a lot more freedom than we used to when we're working with ZSpheres. Now, ZSpheres, again, they are a very old tool in ZBrush. They date back several years, and a lot of people really aren't aware of them because they're so old, and I think they're a very, very valuable, valid method for creating a mesh directly inside of ZBrush. So let's press the A key, W for move, and I'm just going to stretch. Hold down the Alt key, I'm just going to stretch these legs down. I want these to be a little bit longer. There we are. And if we wanted to put toes in there, we would do the exact same thing we did before with the hands. Go to Q for draw, and I'm going to treat the big toe like I treated the thumb. Create a root that comes off the side, then create a child sphere. W for move. And let's pull that child sphere forward, and then add a knuckle in the middle. I'll go to E for scale and just scale up the tip, and then press the A key. That's going to be our big toe. And now we're just going to create 4 spheres for the other toes. Double click off the model and go to Q for draw, and there'll be 1, double click off the model, 2, double click off the model, 3, double click off the model, 4, and double click off the model. Press the A key to preview. Always preview to make sure that your mesh is not turning inside out or you don't have an extra Z sphere that you're not aware of. Now we'll create our child spheres. Remember to press and hold shift to snap them to the same size, and then always double click off the model after each sphere. W for move, we can bring those toes forward, and then preview. Now there's going to be gaps in between the toes just by virtue of the way ZSpheres work. Again, that's not a problem. Once we start sculpting, we can easily come in with the inflate brush and inflate these areas and bring those toes closer together. So that's just down to the sculpting later. The important part is right now to get the volumes. So now we have feet in place. Preview our mesh. Now, let's say that we wanted to do something else here. Perhaps we want to put some horns on the character. Let's come up to the head here. Press the A key. And I'm going to actually delete a sphere here. So if you have a sphere and you want to delete it, press the Alt key and click on the sphere. Oops, let me zoom in so I can get that sphere. Press the Alt key. Oh, that's giving me a problem. Let me scale that up so I can actually get to it. There we go. Press the Alt key. Q for draw. I was in move mode. Press the Alt key and that will delete the sphere. So make sure you're in move mode. Or excuse me, make sure you're in draw mode. I was in move mode, so if I Alt click on it, it won't do anything. So go to Q for draw, Alt click, and that will delete the sphere. So I'm going to draw those new spheres up here at the top. Q for draw. We'll draw some base spheres here for the horns. Press the A key. That previews that mesh. Press the A key again to exit out of preview mode, and I'm just going to draw a child sphere here, and then go to move and bring that out.
I'm going to go to Q for draw and add a couple child spheres along the length of that chain. And that way I can start to adjust the curve of these horns. We can get kind of an interesting effect here. Let's go ahead and draw a child sphere here. For the very, very tip of the horn, let's move that up and forward. Press the A key, and there you can see our preview mesh. I'm going to add one more child in between these last two, just give it a little bit more curvature. There we go. Now let's say that at this point we decide we need wings on here. So what I'll do is I'll take my shoulders, let's move them forward just a little bit to give ourselves a little bit more room to place wings here. Go to Q for draw. I'm going to draw two spheres here at the back. Double click off the model and draw two more child spheres and just drag those out and then press the A key to preview. So we're going to treat these like the bones and the wings. I'm going to draw Q for draw mode. I'm going to insert three spheres along here and go to move. And I'm going to just adjust the uppermost border of these wings like this. Q for draw. Press the A key to preview. Press the A key to drop out of preview mode. Now I'm going to zoom in here and I'm going to create some child spheres. So let's create a child sphere here, a child sphere here, and a child sphere here. These are going to be just the bones and the wings. Let's bring these down, bring this down, and bring this down. And then draw child spheres along here, and then just adjust their flow like this. Press the A key to preview, and that's going to be the basic framework of our wings. Now, if I wanted to rotate them back slightly, I could go to R for rotate and click in between the first and second Z-sphere, and I can just rotate those back like that. Press the A key, make sure I'm not in preview mode. Go to W for move. I'm going to add another child sphere here and move that out. Like this. Let's add just a little bit of curvature to the wings, just by grabbing those knuckles in the wing bones and pulling them back. That'll come into play later when we want to create a wing membrane, which is something that we're going to do using Z-spheres, but we're going to use a different method of Z-spheres. We're going to use Z-spheres for retopology, which is another somewhat obscure ZBrush feature, which is actually very, very nice. It's just older, so people generally aren't aware of it. So I'm going to position these, bring these up. And there we go. So now we have our Z-sphere model. I'm going to save my tool. So I'm going to save it as a Z tool. Remember that your Z tool only saves everything that's under the tool menu. It doesn't save everything that's currently active in ZBrush. And if I save this Z-sphere model, I'm going to save it as a Z-sphere mesh. I can always come back to this Z-sphere mesh. I can use it to generate another similar model. I can continue to edit it, or I can use it for rigging and posing. So I'm going to go to my project files here. Let's go ahead and save this. Now this is not a sculptable mesh yet. This is just a Z-sphere model. If I want to make this sculptable, I go to Tool, Adaptive Skin. Now we've been pressing Preview, that's the A hotkey, and you saw that we have a Dynamesh resolution slider here. I want to point out there's also an option for classic skinning. A few versions of ZBrush past, they actually changed the skinning algorithm for Z-spheres. So they left classic skinning in here for legacy. If you have very, very old Z-sphere models, you can still load them up and have them work. I think it's worth mentioning, if you turn on classic skinning, you do get a completely different effect, which is not always desirable. So be aware that that button is there. If you have that turned on, it will not look like the mesh that I've created. So I can adjust my density. My density is simply the number of subdivision levels that will be created when I make my mesh. Again, I turn Dynamesh resolution down to 0 because I'm going to Dynamesh it anyway, and I'd rather just start with my base lowest subdivision levels, continue to sculpt on that, and then choose when to Dynamesh. Now here's the important part, make adaptive skin. If I press make adaptive skin, watch up here in the tool palette, you're going to see a new tool appear. Click make adaptive skin, and now I have skin ZSphere. If I click that, this is an actual polygon model. I can Shift D and step down my 2 subdivision levels and step up. This can be subdivided, sculpted, Dynameshed. This is what we're actually working on. Your ZSphere model, this is separate from your skin mesh. What I like to do is take my ZSphere mesh, go to Subtool, and then append that skin into it. So I'm always carrying that ZSphere mesh around. That ZSphere chain can be used for rigging, can be used for posing, and it can be utilized once again if I want to make some changes. But you can't change your skin by going back and changing your ZSphere chain. Once you've created your skin, this is a separate Z tool. So I just append it into the stack here. So I'm always going to have that ZSphere model available. I'm not going to end up losing it. But the skin is the one that we're actually going to be sculpting on. So let's save our work again.
Now we're ready to start sculpting. We've got 2 subdivision levels because we had that set under adaptive skin. So at this stage we can come in, I might add an extra subdivision level, go to my clay tubes brush, and then turn off the alpha. And then I might start building up volumes. Use the move brush to adjust the volumes and the silhouettes. Again, the whole idea of ZSpheres is just to create the most basic armature upon which I can then sculpt. I'm not concerned about getting everything perfect in the ZSphere chain. I just want to get a base that I can work from.
There's various ways that you can create meshes in ZBrush now. You can use polygon modeling inside of ZBrush with ZModeler. You can use Dynamesh and insert meshes to build up a character very, very quickly. It's entirely up to you. There's so many different options, but I think it's very important to understand each one. I'm just using the smooth brush to knock back the facets in those horns a little bit, taking the move brush and shifting things around. Now, of course, remember, every single ZSphere has its own Z tool, or every single ZSphere has its own polygroup. So it actually makes it quite easy to organize the mesh. So I might come back here and start isolating just the torso. Again, for polygroups, Control-Shift-Click on a polygroup will show or hide it. So I'm just going to hide the polygroups I want to be working on right now, and then Control-Shift-Click and drag on the background to invert that visibility. Now I'll come back here and start to suggest the scapula and the back, take the move brush, shift that out a little bit, adjust these. And at a certain point, I will be ready to go ahead and Dynamesh. So then I will just do what I normally do and go to Geometry, Dynamesh, and let's set our Dynamesh. Just go ahead and click Dynamesh, and then again, it asks you if you want to freeze the subdivision levels, tell it no. And here we go. Now we have a Dynamesh mesh. I'll turn off frame mode, do a little bit of smoothing to knock away those facets, and we can start sculpting just like we did in our Dynamesh tutorial. It's a very, very cool way of working. Let's turn down our focal shift on that clay tubes brush. We won't do too much sculpting on here, so we want to be focusing on the various tools for ZSpheres. But I do want to show you that it is very, very simple to come in here and just start sculpting on this as a Dynamesh as you would normally. And again, I think this is much faster, just directly sculpting these shapes, than trying to go in and create these volumes and create these shapes directly using the ZSpheres themselves. I think it's just a waste of time. You're using your time most effectively if you treat the ZSpheres again like an armature. Take the inflate brush and create the adductors and the thighs there. I can take my damn standard brush and start to sketch in the anatomy of the arm, hitting it with the smooth brush just to knock things back. It's very, very quick and easy. I've started a lot of characters using ZSpheres. A lot of times if I have to do things like dragons or things that are not necessarily bipeds or quadrupeds, things that have an unusual shape, I will start them generally with Dynamesh, start them with ZSpheres to get that base model, and then Dynamesh and start sculpting on top of that. It's just quick and easy, and there's a lot of things that I get called on to make that I just don't have a base model for, especially if it's things like dragons. I should have a base model dragon by now, but every dragon ends up being a little bit different. Or, sea serpents, alien creatures, aquatic aliens, things like that. Things that just, diverge from the standard kind of bipedal or quadrupedal forms. ZSpheres can be a really great way to block that in very, very quickly and efficiently. So, again, I don't want to spend too much time sculpting on this during this demo because we've already got sculpting videos that you can watch. I just want to make sure that you see how easy it is once you've dynameshed it to just go in and start working. So let's take a look now at those wings. I'm going to go ahead and take the smooth brush and I'm going to taper down the tips of those wing bones. I'll do B for brush, P for pinch, select the pinch brush, and I like to just quickly tap the tips of those wing bones just to give it a nice little point. Now, there's no membrane on these wings. I just have the bones. How will we create a wing membrane? We're going to use ZSpheres for that as well. It's a very, very neat thing that you can do. It's ZSpheres for retopology. It's another older tool within Zbrush that's actually been mostly supplanted by the topology brush. However, the topology brush is bad at drawing topology across gaps like this. It excels at drawing topology on top of an existing mesh. If you watch the video on retopology, you'll see that. This fits very nicely in here because it is the ZSpheres video. So we're going to talk about using ZSpheres for topology. So I want to create a wing membrane, which will be a separate Z tool, which I think is a great thing to do while you're doing wing membranes. When I was working on the Kid Who Would Be King, the Morgana wings, I kept the membrane separate on her model for a long time because she was in the design phase and a lot of things were changing. So as I moved the wings around, I could regenerate the wing membrane to match. And then I could easily go in there and divide it up and work on it separately. I almost considered it like a costume element. And then at the very, very end of the process, I would bake the wing membrane into the existing model and then retopologize the whole thing as one piece. So let's look at how to make a wing membrane. So to create a wing membrane, the first thing we want to do is make a proxy mesh that's just the bones of the wing itself. To do that, I'm going to make sure the skin is selected and I'm going to duplicate that subtool. Go into frame mode, and now I'm going to hide each polygroup of the body just by Control-Shift clicking on it. Remember, any polygroup that you want to hide, if you Control-Shift click, it will either show or hide that group. Now that I've got the hands and feet isolated, I can go to B for brush, S for select lasso, and then if I Control-Shift click and drag, I get this lasso selection. Press the Alt key and it turns red and everything inside of it is hidden. Let's do it again up here. And there we go. So now we have just the wing bones isolated. So I will go to Tool, Geometry, Modify Topology, and I will click the button Delete Hidden. So now I only have the wing bones themselves, and this will be a proxy mesh. We'll delete this mesh later. I just want to use it as a guide to create the wing membrane. With that done, let's go back to the Tool menu, select a Z-sphere again. This is a fresh Z-sphere. Go to Tool, Rigging. Under Rigging, you'll find Select Mesh. If I click that, it opens the tool palette, and I can just select Skin Z-sphere there. That is my wing bone proxy mesh, but you don't see anything because Solo is turned on. Turn off Solo, and there we have our wing bones. Now I want to enable topology, so I click Topology and click Edit Topology. Now the Z-sphere disappears. I'll turn my draw size down, and we're going to be drawing Z-spheres again, but the Z-spheres will look different this time. They're going to create chains. So I'm going to click a point here, a point here, a point here, a point here, and a point here, closing that quad. Double click off the model so nothing is selected, and you can see the outline of the quad is an orange rectangle. Press the A key for preview. We don't have anything just yet, so let's go ahead and draw another triangle here. Double click off the model and press the A key. There we go. Now you see our preview mesh. If I go to frame mode, you'll see the mesh that's going to create in Dynamesh mode. So I'm going to go to adaptive skin and I'm going to turn my Dynamesh resolution down to 0. Preview again, and now we see the actual quads that will be generated. Now if I want to delete any points, I just Alt click on them, and that will delete those points. those points being tiny little Z-spheres. So let's do this again. We'll draw a quad. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's connect that. There we go. 1, 2, 3. We have a little spare one there. Let's do it again. Oops. Let's connect these 2 points. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Double click. Press the A key. There's our preview mesh. So let's carry this on. Let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. Double click off the model and press the A key, and you can see this group of polygons starts to grow. Double click off the model, press the A key. Let's carry on another quad, preview, carry on another quad, and preview. Now we're just going to go ahead and connect it to the body, create a triangle there, and create a quad here. And there we go. We have the beginnings of our membrane. There's no thickness to it yet, and right now it's just a preview mesh. We need to actually generate a skin from this. So to do that, I will go to the Adaptive Skin menu, and I will click Make Adaptive Skin. And that creates a skin Z-sphere, Z-tool there, which is just the wing membrane. So if I go back to our original model, we can now delete that proxy mesh subtool, and now we will append in the wing skin in its place. And there we have it. So let's solo this. Now you may notice that there is no thickness to this yet. So what I want to do is I want to go to Tool, Display Properties, turn off double-sided, so now I can see which way the normals are actually facing. So that's very, very important because we're about to add thickness and we don't want to add the thickness inside out. To add thickness, we're going to go to B for Brush, Z for Z-Modeler, and select the Z-Modeler brush. Click OK. Now, the Z-Modeler brush is contextual. I mouse over an edge or a point or a space or a quad and then press the space bar. The menu I get will be specific to whatever polygon element I have selected. If you want to learn more about the Z-Modeler brush, be sure to watch the video where we talk specifically about Z-Modeler. We're just going to talk about this one function here, QMesh. Mouse over a face, press the space bar. Make sure we're set to QMesh. As our operation, our target needs to be polygroup all. We're going to extrude all of these polygons. So if I click and drag, it tells me that the mesh is composed of multiple subdivision levels. That's because my skin was generated to have 2 subdivision levels. So I need to go to Geometry and delete lower. Now I will be able to use that operation. So click and drag. You see that it starts to add thickness there. Now, had I done this the opposite direction like this, it would go inside out. So be careful of that. That's why it's very important to turn on your turn off double-sided under Display Properties, so you can actually see what you're getting in terms of the surface normal. So let's add some thickness there. Now I'm going to zoom into the edge, and I want to make sure that we add some sharpness. So I'm going to click and drag on the edge, and that will just insert an edge loop. And I'll just drag them along each side there. Press the A key. Press the D key, say yes, and that'll give me a preview of what that smooth mesh is going to look like. Shift D will step out of that preview. If I'm happy with that, let's turn off solo so we can see the wing bones. Now we have our polygon mesh for the wing membrane with thickness. So I'm going to add a couple subdivision levels with Control D. I'm going to take the Move brush. Now if my Move brush doesn't get large enough, double click the dynamic button there that's inside the slider and I can get the Move brush larger. We're just basically going to manually shift these faces so they're sitting inside the wing bones. Again, this can all be merged into a single subtool later. I just want to make sure that the wing membrane is exactly where I want it to be. You'll notice also that my Z-sphere model is visible, so I'll go to my subtool menu and I'll just turn off visibility on that. Step down a couple subdivision levels, and let's just add some curvature, some scalloping in between each one of these wing bones. Step up another subdivision level, and we can carry on adding a little bit more scalloping here. Let's turn off frame mode. Shift F turns frame mode off. And we'll add another subdivision level or two and add some smoothing here. Take the move brush, hold down the Alt key, and you can push in and out with the move brush, which is really handy for things like this. This technique works really great for costume elements, wing membranes, fish fins. If I go to the move brush and go to curve and turn on accurate curve mode, my move brush will give me a nice point as I pull these points down. It makes it nice and sharp. There we go. Now if I alt click on the wing bones themselves, I can give them just a little bit of smoothing if I want to add a little bit of a tapering in between each joint. Go to my move brush and maybe we'll pull some little points off of this. Change the curvature of that just a little bit. Turn this down and we'll just pull these down into points. Alt click on the wing membrane again. We can add some smoothing to this and shift this around again. There we go. Now if I want to sculpt on these wing membranes, which of course I'm going to want to do, what I'll need to do is go in, let's take our standard brush, and let's select Alpha 58. Let's say that we want to sculpt some wrinkles on here. So we need to have enough geometry to accept that. So let's divide it up to, let's go to geometry, and let's divide to about 1,000,000 faces. Now if I hold down the Alt key and start creating sort of a wrinkle pattern in these wings, watch what happens. If I roll around to the back side, you might see, depending on how large my brush size is, I might get bleed through. If I do, I need to go to auto masking and make sure that back face masking is turned off. So if we turn off back face masking and repeat those strokes, watch what happens. If I start sculpting wrinkles in these wings, you see it bleeds through to the back side and it's in reverse. It's recessed on the back, but not on the front. So what I want to do here is get my sculpting isolated to just one side of that membrane. So I need to go to Brush, Auto Masking, make sure back face masking is turned on. Now watch what happens. If I sculpt now with back face masking turned on, I can add these wrinkles in this membrane, but it doesn't bleed through to the other side. If I go to the back side, and let's change to a different alpha here so we can see that it definitely doesn't bleed through. We'll go to Spray, and we'll just add this texture to the back. And again, you see that that does not transfer over to the front. That is back face masking under Brush, Auto Masking, Back Face Masking. So that is how we can use ZSpheres as a topology tool to actually generate new topology. You could feasibly use it to retopologize a model, but in that case, I believe that the topology brush is a better solution, as well as ZRemodeler or ZRemesher. At this point, those two newer tools supplant ZSpheres as a retopology tool, but ZSpheres are still very, very powerful as a tool for actually generating new meshes. Now, let's take a look at one more thing we can do with ZSpheres. We can use ZSpheres to rig a character, which is actually quite a cool thing to do if you're more accustomed to rigging and posing in like an FK, IK kind of situation where you've got bones that you're manipulating in Maya or 3D Studio Max. And let's take a look at how we can do that. Now here we have the NICZ default human male mesh that comes preloaded with ZBrush. I'm going to go to my tool menu and select a ZSphere once again. This time I will go down to my rigging menu, select mesh, and let's select that human mesh. Now I have the ZSphere selected. I will go to E for scale, and I'm going to scale this down, and this is going to be my root ZSphere. This will be the center of the rig, of the skeleton. Make sure the X symmetry is turned on so I can move it up and maintain the center line. E for scale, and we'll scale it down. Turn on solo, so I'm just looking at that ZSphere. And I'm going to go to draw, turn my draw size down, and let's draw a child sphere, holding the shift key to snap it to the same size. Roll around to the bottom and do the same thing on the bottom. Double click off the model, zoom out, and then turn off solo mode. Go to W for move, and let's move this sphere up to the torso and this one down to the hips. Let's go back to draw. Let's draw a child sphere here. for our shoulders. W for move. Let's move these back. Move this back. Let's move that root sphere up a bit. And there we go. Let's draw a child sphere for the arms. Let's move this one down. Make sure that it's sitting inside the elbow. Draw another sphere for the wrist. Bring that down to the wrist. Now each one of these spheres, when it's rigged, is going to capture the vertices around it. So I could go in here and I could actually rig each individual finger, or if I want to put just a large Z-sphere here at the hand, this should capture all the vertices of the fingers themselves. Then I find that it's actually easier to pose fingers using transpose, but I don't mind posing the body using a Z-sphere chain like this. Let's add another sphere right here just to catch that thumb. Bring that out. Draw another child sphere here. Bring this down, just rotating around and being very sure that we're placing these spheres inside that mesh. Now I'm going to come back to the torso here. I'm going to draw two child spheres here. Let's move them out and off to the sides. Can be a little tricky to grab them. There we go. And these spheres are just going to serve to capture the rib cage. Let's draw some hip spheres here. Move them into position. Draw two child spheres for the legs. And let's bring these down and place them in the knees. Now for the knees, I like to create two spheres. I'll create another child sphere here. Bring this down so the knee actually has two spheres representing it rather than just one. I find that gives me a slightly better deformation. Let's move this sphere down to the ankle. Press the E key so we can scale it down. And let's add another sphere in there and just move it back ever so slightly to get that curvature of the shin. Draw a child sphere here. Move that forward for the toes. Draw a child sphere here and move that down and back for the heel. There we go. Now if I press the E key and then just Alt click and drag between the root Z sphere and any other sphere, I can scale down my skeleton, so it might be a little bit easier to see the model underneath. I'm going to take the move and bring the torso up. I'm going to draw another sphere here for the neck. Place that there. Put a sphere in between and just shift that around so we're getting quite an accurate curvature to the head or to the neck there. Let's turn on solo so we can see this very clearly. I'm going to draw a sphere here for the head. Turn off solo and then just move that up. Remember, we need to see the transitional spheres there for the neck. Great. So now we have our skeleton. I'm going to click Bind Mesh. Now what's happened is that skeleton is bound to the underlying mesh. So if I turn off my X symmetry and go to R for rotate, I can click and drag and I can rotate these Z tools, or these Z spheres, I mean to say. So if I click here, bring this up, rotate this down, I can rotate the forearm. Maybe I want to bend the wrist. I can do that. Let's bend the leg. So I'll click and drag to rotate that. I'll click and drag to rotate that. And you see what I mean about getting a nicer bend there if I've got a couple spheres for the knee. If I click and drag, I can bring the foot down. Let's bring the heel back a little bit. Let's rotate that leg out. You see everywhere that we've got a sphere, it's smart. It's capturing the vertices that are related to that particular sphere. Let's bend that back. We can bring the whole torso forward. Let's bring the neck up, bring the head up. Now here you see that we're not catching enough vertices in the chin, so you probably want to add another sphere to capture those chin vertices. If I click and drag, go to rotate, hold down the Alt key. There we go. Just click and drag. I can turn that head. And then when I'm happy with my pose, let's go ahead and do a little tweak to this foot here. Let's rotate that up. There we go. When I'm happy with that pose, I'll go to Adaptive Skin and click Make Adaptive Skin. And then I've got a skin that represents my posed model. Now, of course, you're never going to get a perfect bind here. You will have to go in with your move brush and sculpt some corrections. But what's important is that you've actually been able to pose that model. If I go back to Adaptive Skin, my pose here, go to Adaptive Skin. If I turn my Dynamesh resolution down and make Adaptive Skin, my new skin, there we go, you see is actually composed of normal polygons with 2 subdivision levels rather than being a Dynamesh mesh as we have here. So ZSpheres are a very, very powerful rigging tool that allow us to go in and have rigging that might be more similar to things that you're familiar with, just taking an armature, taking a skeleton, putting it inside your model, posing it, and then sculpting from there. Now, anytime you start posing a character, your sculpture will become asymmetrical. As the body moves, the pectoralis muscle on this side will be different than that side, so that's perfectly fine. I usually go ahead and pose something relatively early once I've got the basic anatomy blocked in, and then start sculpting asymmetrically from there. Now, there are other methods of symmetry. There is a symmetrical symmetry that you can use under Transform. If you turn on Activate Symmetry, there is posable symmetry. Let's go to our skin here. There we go. Go to Transform, Activate Symmetry. We have a posable symmetry here. And we'll talk more about that in another chapter. But it is possible to sculpt on things like the head that do remain somewhat symmetrical, but the body you really will be sculpting asymmetrically. So that is how we can use ZSpheres as a rigging tool. I think it's very, very powerful to think about ZSpheres as something that you can use in your day-to-day practice. I use it all the time when I have to create a non-standardized mesh, something like a sea serpent or a creature that I don't have a base model for. I use it whenever I need to make certain types of costume elements. I use it for retopology to actually generate new meshes. And there are instances when I have to create a complex pose where I will go ahead and pose with a rig like this, and then utilize that to establish my ZBrush rig and my pose. ZBrush rigs also can be saved. If I save this Z tool, it will save as a rig. And when we get to posing, you will notice that if we go to the Z plugin menu and go to Transpose Master, you can elect to use a ZSphere rig for Transpose Master instead of Transpose. We'll talk about that in more depth in our chapter on Transpose Master. So I recommend that you watch our video on transpose and posing to get a clearer idea of how that works. So that completes this look at ZSpheres. I hope you found this useful and you are able to see ways that you can work this tool into your own workflow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.